Welcome to Introduction to Business. Chapter 1. The first step in understanding business is defining what it actually is. Business is an activity involving individuals working alone or with others or organizations or groups of people who conduct activity to provide products. Products may be either goods or services. Those products are then sold to consumers to satisfy the consumer's need for the purposes of the business making a profit. A good is something that is tangible, that is, that you can touch it, you can buy it, you can pick it up, you can put it in your pocket. Something with some kind of a physical presence. Things like cars, clothes, cell phones, food, etc. Services is work that's provided to another for a fee. For example, I am a teacher. I am not giving you any goods, but I am providing a service. The product that is being offered is a service. In order to determine a profit, you must look at the amount of money that a business brings in from selling its products, either goods or services. The amount of money coming in is known as revenue. You must deduct from the revenue that is collected from selling products any expenses that were used to create the products, the goods and services that were sold. So for example, if I make $100,000 in revenue and I have $75,000 in expenses, my profit, the money that's left over, is $25,000. If you're a successful business, you can continue to make profits year after year, month after month, and then you can use that money to expand your business, to reinvest it, to buy better equipment, to keep it. If you're the owner, you can pay yourself a bonus, you can share some of the money with the employees, you can create new products, new services, you can expand and franchise, whatever you think would help your business out. However, if expenses exceed revenue, that is known as a loss. If a business continues to suffer losses month after month or even year after year, unless it has a lot of money in the bank to be able to fund itself, to be able to operate while those losses are occurring, those businesses will typically run out of money and go out of business or become bankrupt. Bankruptcy is when you go to court and it's a legal process in order to protect your assets and to let your creditors, the people who loaned you money or people you owe money to, how they're going to end up getting paid. How do businesses make money? As noted, some people work alone, but most people work with others. Whether you're working alone or in a group, people who are engaged in business compete against others for the consumers. McDonald's and Burger King are fighting over people who want the same type of fast food. If one is perceived to provide a better value, meaning more bang for the buck, a better product, quicker service, cheaper prices, one company may have an advantage over the other. In order to succeed in making money and running a business, you need to understand the business environment that the businesses operate in. Economic issues, whether it's local, national, or global, politics. People can pass laws that make your product illegal or regulate your business to some degree. And legal factors, contracts, purchase and sale agreements. People may get sued if they are at fault for something that causes damages or injuries to others. All of those things play a part in how the businesses operate. Some general terms that I think we need to cover to be able to understand the explanations for how businesses actually go about making money, i.e., a profit, is demand. Demand is the desire or willingness of a consumer to buy a product, either a good or a service, and that is measured over time. Supply is the amount of goods or services that is available to consumers. Manufacturers typically will produce a supply sufficient to satisfy demand. If you make too much, you'll have a surplus and people may not want to buy all of it. If you have too little, you're not going to be making as much money as you could because you're not going to be able to sell the products that people want. There's often a chicken and egg kind of argument. Which comes first? Is it supply or demand? Some things are basically inherently going to be in demand. People need food, people need shelter, people need clothing, people need medicine and medical facilities and services. So because people need those things, you know that you can make money if you can figure out a way to provide them at an advantageous price. On the other hand, you may come up with an idea for a product or a service that people had never seen before. When phones first came out, cell phones, I never really understood at first why people would want a camera built into their phone. Something that I just didn't understand. Obviously, everybody has a phone with a camera and video and internet, etc. Putting it all in the same package was something that people wanted, even if they didn't know that they wanted it. So if you build it, like they said in the movie Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. That's only applicable if you have a product or a service that is kind of groundbreaking and unique that people will definitely want. If you come up with a great idea that you think is a great idea, but nobody actually wants it, then there's not going to be any demand for it and you'll be wasting your money. A market is the place where buyers and sellers meet to satisfy supply and demand. It's much more efficient to go where people are selling things if you want to buy something. In Boston, for example, there is a subway station called Haymarket. Guess what they used to sell at Haymarket? Hay. Quincy Marketplace, they still have people bring fruits and vegetables on the weekends that you can go and buy. If you want to buy that fruit and vegetables and that food, you'll know where to go. They will come with their supplies, you will come with your money, and you'll do an exchange. The cost of something is not the same as the price for something. Oftentimes, people will buy something and someone will say, well, how much did it cost? Technically, that might be okay because it does cost you the amount of money that you paid for it, but cost is really a component of price. When you go to a store and you buy a product, you are paying for the creation of that product, the manufacture, the distribution, the shipping of that product. You're paying for the rent of the building that that product is housed in. You're paying for the utilities. You're paying for the employee's salary. All of those are costs and they are built into the price. The company only makes money when they charge you a price that's in excess of their costs. If a bottle of iced tea is priced at $3 and it costs $1.50, the company selling it to you is making $1.50 in profit. So the price and the cost are slightly different. They are components of the same topic, however. Supply and demand are definitely linked. One exception to the rule of supply and demand are something that is rare. If you have an Andy Warhol painting or a Rembrandt or a Michelangelo statue, these are things that are not going to be really subject to the normal rules of supply and demand because there's so few of them. If they are in demand, it just depends on what people are willing to pay for it. If you're talking about a bowl of cereal, there's usually not going to be the same type of an example that you could compare it to. There's not really any super rare cereal. Cereal is cereal. You can go to the store, you can buy it. If you want it and it's there, that'll take care of itself. The thing about supply and demand and its impact on prices is that if a lot of people want something, hopefully the supply will increase as well. If I know that people want to buy a particular type of cereal, I'll make a lot of it because I know I can sell it to them. If I don't make enough, however, then the supply will drop. And when something becomes rare, as we just said, with things like paintings, etc., if there's still demand, the price is typically going to go up. If there happens to be a natural disaster, a hurricane, and it impacts the ability of the country to produce oil and refine it into gasoline, there could be a shortage of gasoline. Assuming that everybody needs to continue to drive their car, prices will probably go up because people will be willing to pay more in order to get it. If I only have 5 of something and 10 people want it, the 5 who pay me the most will get it, and that will cause the price to go up. However, if demand drops for whatever reason, if I'm making a product that isn't really popular any longer, the only way that I can move that product is to lower the price. If there's too much of something, if I have a surplus, even if demand stays the same, but I have too much supply, that will cause prices to drop for exactly the opposite reason. If I've got 10 of something and only 5 people want it, chances are people aren't going to want to buy 2 unless I lower the price considerably. The equilibrium point is a graphical representation of a point at which the demand curve, so-called because it gets graphed in a XY axis, and the supply curve, wherever they meet, that's where prices and demand are perfectly leveled. If you are in equilibrium, that means that the prices are established because supply and demand are okay. If something happens to move supply or demand one way or the other, the prices will rise or fall depending on how much of a shift there will be. Supply and demand is also related to something called inflation, and that's been in the news quite a bit as of late. Inflation is when prices increase over time, and it's usually caused by some type of market pressure. The first thing to consider is supply. If something is scarce, as we discussed, prices typically rise. However, the effect of having a high supply of money can also have the same effect. Unlike products, where there's a big supply of something, typically prices will drop. For money, if there's a bigger supply of money, the value of that money drops. However, the effect that that has on prices means that prices increase. So for example, if the government wants to help the economy because we just had a pandemic or an earthquake or a natural disaster or just some type of an economic catastrophe like we had in 2007 and 8, the government can make money available by lowering interest rates or just to hand out money to people like they did during the pandemic and give economic incentive payments. If everybody has a lot of money to spend, then everybody will be buying the limited supply of what is available. If I have more money, then I can offer more in order to get what I want. And if you have more money, you'll offer more too, and that can drive prices up. Another thing that affects inflation is if the economy is going well, that creates scarcity of resources. If everybody is employed, how do I hire somebody? If I own a McDonald's and I need someone to make my fries, but everybody already has a job and nobody wants to work for minimum wage, the only way that I'll be able to hire someone is to pay them more. But if I have to pay them more, that means my costs went up. And if my costs went up, that means my prices will go up. So if I have to pay $17 an hour instead of $15 an hour to have somebody make fries, maybe the fries went up a quarter. And if you have to pay a quarter more for your fries, maybe you have to go to your boss and ask for a raise. If they give you a raise, then they have to charge more for their products. So it becomes kind of a cyclical upward rise in prices due to the pressure of having scarcity. Typically, when the economy is going well, you do anticipate at least some level of inflation because of disequilibrium between supply and demand. On the opposite spectrum, if the economy suffers some kind of a shock, a housing bubble bursts or a tech bubble bursts, if everybody's losing their job, then nobody can pay for anything. And if I'm selling products and nobody's buying them, the only way I can get them to buy them is to lower my prices. That is known as deflation. So when you have a decrease in price over time, that is also caused by market pressure. Now, you may think that prices dropping is a good thing. Inflation and deflation are both bad. If inflation is happening, the money that you have in your pocket, every second that it sits there, it becomes less valuable. If something costs a dollar today and it costs $1.10 tomorrow, I better buy it today. If I wait, I'll only have 90 cents worth of purchasing power. If there's deflation and I have a dollar in my pocket and something costs a dollar today, it may only cost 90 cents tomorrow. So I have no incentive to buy it today. I have to wait till tomorrow. But if the next day it's going to be 80 cents, then I won't buy it then either. When you have less of an incentive to buy, the businesses that are selling these products have more of an incentive to lower prices even further. So you get a cycle spinning in the opposite direction. Nobody's buying anything because prices are dropping. And if nobody's buying anything, the only thing you can do is lower prices to get people to buy. So both cycles, either inflationary cycles or deflationary cycles, can be very problematic and they're not good for the economy and they're not good for consumers. Later on during the semester, we'll talk about what the government can do to try to address how to manage the economy and try to avoid inflation and deflation. One of the things that is necessary to understand is the concept of value. If I'm offering some type of a good or a service, if it is not perceived as providing value to the consumers, then they will not buy it. Value is typically some type of a combination of quality and price. If I sell you something that's super cheap and the quality doesn't necessarily have to be that high, people will buy it. If I want to sell something that's a little bit better, it may be more expensive, but if it's better quality, people may be willing to buy it because they think it provides them with value. If I buy a product for $10 and I need to use it every day and it falls apart after a week, I'll go out and buy another one for $10, and then in a week I have to go buy another one for $10. If I buy one for $50 because it's better quality and I only have to buy one a year, that actually saves me money even though I'm spending more money up front for it. So for my purposes, because I use this product more frequently, there may be more value in buying something that's actually more expensive at the outset because it can save me money over time. Value is kind of subjective and it's dependent upon the psychology of the people who are going into the marketplace to buy things. Some people don't care about certain things. I don't care about what kind of shoes I wear or what kind of sneakers I buy. I just buy the cheapest things. I don't really care what kind of car I drive. I just want to get from point A to point B. I buy a car that runs. Some people want to buy a Lamborghini and they think it's totally worth it and it provides value to spend $350,000 on a car to go and sit in Boston traffic. I don't understand it, but some people do find value in that. And businesses that can understand the psychology behind the consumers and how they determine what is valuable to them, they can get an advantage when they market their wares. So most businesses make money providing services, manufacturing goods, or selling products at wholesale or retail. So services, like I said, I'm a teacher, I'm providing you a service. I'm also an attorney. I can be hired by people to provide contracts. I can do a closing for real estate. I can write a will, etc. I can do that on my own. I can provide a service to somebody. That's great. I could also be a manufacturer. I could be a farmer, for example. I could raise things from scratch. I could plant seeds and harvest wheat. Or I could buy the wheat and turn it into bread. Whatever you're doing, you're taking raw materials, you're adding value to it, and then you're selling it to the market. When I'm a manufacturer, very rarely do manufacturers have expertise in selling as well as manufacturing. So usually what they do is they sell it to a wholesaler or a distributor. The wholesalers are the ones who sell it to retailers, which we'll talk about in a moment. But the wholesaler's job is to take the things that have been manufactured and put them into distribution networks so they can get to the consumers at the end user stage where they can actually purchase it. We all have had experience with retail. If you go into Target or CVS, any of these places like a department store or even Amazon, that is retail. Target didn't make the clothes that you're buying. They didn't grow the food that you're buying. They didn't manufacture the medication that you're picking up through their pharmacy. What they do is they run the store and they put all of these different products in one location, which is a convenience. If you want to buy a pair of pants and a dozen eggs and pick up a prescription, you can go to Target instead of going to three different stores. The cost of that is the retail markup. They are buying all of those products through the distributors from the manufacturers, or the bigger companies may actually buy from the manufacturers directly. Walmart is famous for trying to cut prices by buying directly from manufacturers and then shipping that to the stores for retail sale. Typically what happens is the manufacturers calculate their cost and then they sell it to a wholesaler or directly with a markup. The wholesalers then sell it to the retailers at a markup. The markup is how they make their profit. So a wholesaler will buy it from a manufacturer, then they will sell it to a retailer for a little bit more to put that money in their pocket. The retailer is now paying the wholesale cost and they're marking it up to the retail price that you end up paying. They're charging you basically for the convenience of having everything located in one store. You don't have to go to a bunch of different stores and you get what you want. Companies that are able to cut costs, either by eliminating the middleman, as the saying goes, cutting out the wholesalers, or negotiating cheaper prices with manufacturers, they can typically lower their costs, thereby lowering their prices, which may attract more customers than the competition that is unable to do that. Businesses typically run in order to make a profit, but some companies are actually nonprofits. These are structured much like any other business. They do all of the same things that most businesses do. They have revenues, they have finance, they have management, they have communications and marketing and research and development. But the point is, the money that's left over after the expenses is not put in their pocket. It's not paid to the owners, it's not given to the employees. It may be used to expand the services that they provide, but it's typically for a public good. Charities are typically nonprofits. Things like the American Red Cross, the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the American Cancer Society, etc. These are businesses in the sense that they operate. They have money coming in, they have money going out, and they provide services and products. But the profit is not intended to be put in someone's pocket for their benefit. The benefit is supposed to be put back into the charitable purpose of the company so that they can extend the good deeds that they do to all of the people that they're reaching out to. Next up is resources and factors of production. Resources are the inputs used to produce the outputs. You get raw materials coming in, companies add value, and they put out the finished products to either go through the direct sale to consumers, through the wholesalers, or through the retail process as we discussed. For example, if I'm a carpenter and I buy a lot of wood, just 2x4s and flat sheets, and I manufacture it into a clock, I'm adding value to the wood and creating a new product entirely. If there's demand for that product, that clock, I can sell it at a markup above my cost for time and the raw materials that I used in order to make a profit. The resources that I use, whether it's my time, my expertise, my equipment, or mainly the raw materials, those are known as the factors of production. Factors of production include natural resources that could be land, plants, farming, vegetables. livestock, wind, sun, water, anything that is used that you get from the land, minerals for batteries, for example, anything that you can harvest or dig out of the ground, oil, etc. Those are all natural resources. Typically, they are refined or they are produced in a value-added manner to create a product that people would like to purchase. Labor is also a factor of production. We call them human resources, not natural resources, but they are people. It is a resource, and their capabilities and their education and their talents, physical, intellectual capabilities, those are all known as human capital or human resources. Capital is an economic term that refers to anything of value that is used to create more wealth. Money can be capital, equipment can be capital, your time and your experience can be capital. You use that capital investment in order to create something, typically by providing a service or manufacturing some type of product that you would be selling. Entrepreneurship is when a person or an organization gets together and they see that there is a possibility to make some money. They recognize that there will be demand for particular products, so they want to create a supply. They organize the factors of production, they accept the risk, perform some innovation. They try to become as creative as possible in order to realize a profit. So for an example of baking a cake using natural resources, the wind is harnessed to use electricity, not to mention the wheat that was grown in the farm that was later harvested and produced. The labor is the baker's labor, the creativity and skills coming up with the recipe. The capital is the resources that he has available to him, the ovens, the cake pans, and the ingredients. And then the entrepreneurship part comes in where he came up with the idea that people have a demand for these types of products. So he can either do this as an individual or create a bakery and hire other people to help him out. Functional areas in terms of businesses are usually broken down into management, operations, marketing and sales, finance, and research and development, or R&D. Management is basically what is used by supervisory staff to make sure that actions are planned for, the business is organized in an efficient manner, they control the work that others are doing, and they lead the work that they're doing. Managers typically plan what's going to happen, the actions that need to take place. They oversee the organizational design for efficiency of the business. They assign tasks to employees. They control those tasks, and they lead the employees in completing them. Operations deals with the procedures that are in effect to help transform resources into products. How you go about building a car, how you go about manufacturing things and putting them together in the most efficient and effective way possible. Marketing and sales are two different things. Marketing is a detailed concept where you create a product, you figure out how to manufacture it, you do an assessment regarding supply and demand, you then figure out who the target market is, you figure out what the price is going to be, and you figure out how to get it to them. Sales is after you've done the marketing, it's basically communicating to the public, to the consumers that are out there, that this product exists and it might be a good idea for them to buy it. Finance is planning how to use your money, how to get investment, how to get the most out of it, and where we're going to spend it, how we budget it, how we commit it to future endeavors. Research and development, or R&D, is more of a scientific tactic that is used by larger companies that can afford to do R&D independently to come up with new products. If I have a cell phone that's out there and I want to come up with the next big thing, 6G, 10G, whatever it may be, I would need to do some research in order to monetize the ideas that we come up to create a product to be able to make a profit as a result. When talking about management, words that come up very frequently are effectiveness and efficiency. You always hear you have to be more effective and more efficient. Effectiveness and efficiency are two different things. To be effective means that you successfully completed a task. If I give you a job and you complete it, you are effective. Efficiency, to be efficient, is to complete a task with the least expenditure of resources possible. So if I tell you to build me a table and it takes you a year and costs $6,000, the fact that you completed it does mean that you are effective, but it's not terribly efficient if I need it for less than $100 tomorrow. So to be efficient, you need to be able to figure out through operations and through purchases of raw materials, etc., how you can cut costs and do things in the cheapest, most efficient way possible. It doesn't matter if you are efficient if you never complete what you're trying to do, because then you're not effective. Ideally, you are both effective and efficient. You complete the task and you do it for the least amount of resources. To become more efficient is a product of design. If I really pay attention to how to do my job, how to operationalize the things that we do better than the competition, we can decrease costs and therefore decrease prices and have a competitive advantage over the competition. Managers typically spend time doing planning. This is long-term and short-term goals. Typically, long-term is 6 months or maybe a year or more. Short-term is a couple of months up to half a year. And also figuring out the strategies needed to execute those plans that we've put into effect. Organizing is figuring out how the best way to develop the organization. You create an organizational chart. We have a sales department over here. We have research and development. We have the marketing division. How many people do we need to hire? Figuring out the most efficient way to complete what our mission is, what our objectives are. You give assignments to your employees, but you also have to control the work that they're doing. So managers are the ones that make the assignments, but they also control what the people are doing, what the employees are completing in terms of their work, so that we can make sure that they're doing it in the best manner possible. If it's somebody's doing something late or they're spending too much money, it's management's job to intercede and make a correction. Managers also have to lead the work teams, give people an incentive, maybe motivate them, encourage them, get them excited about doing their job. As we mentioned, operations are where you take the inputs, the factors of production, all the resource that you're using, adding value to it and converting it to the outputs, which are the goods and services you're trying to sell. It's especially important in manufacturing, but operations also exists in things like retail because just getting those products into the store does involve operations. That is an operational strategy that needs to be implemented. But for manufacturing, it's especially important because it's how you actually acquire all those resources, what needs to be done, how those teams are going to be working on it. If you think about the assembly lines for like that Henry Ford popularized during automobile manufacturing, that was an idea about how to increase operations to become more efficient. In the old days, people would just sit there in groups of 2 or 3 and build a car by scratch. You had to know how to do 40 or 50 different things as an individual. When you do an assembly line, all you need to know is how to put the wheel on, or how to install the engine, or how to put on a door, or how to make a weld. You only have to learn how to do a few things and you become very good at it. And then it moves down the assembly line to the next person who's very good at doing that particular component. So when you're thinking about operationalizing, you're trying to figure out how to become more efficient. And the assembly line for any product, but especially for cars, is a great example of how improvements in efficiency can be realized through advances in operations. An operations manager has management oversight of the operational tasks involved in the company. Marketing, as I said, is not sales. Marketing is literally trying to figure out what product you're going to put into the market, hence the name. So the marketing function includes promoting goods and services, which usually comes at the end. That's more of the advertising. The first step is to figure out what types of products we might want to get out there, then determining how they'll be delivered, figuring out how to price them, how to get market share, how to be competitive, and then build and oversee the business's internet presence because marketing and sales have really evolved into requiring the internet to be successful. 30 years ago, you probably could have gotten away without even having a website. Early pioneers maybe had a website to just talk about things. But 20 years ago, people started doing sales online with banking. If you don't have that today, you can't be in business. So marrying internet and IT technology with marketing is critical to be able to get the word out there, to educate consumers about the products that you have, and to actually complete the sales in some cases. Finance managers plan for how to use money, how to get the most out of the money that we have. When we get money, do we have to spend all of it? Can we invest some of it? If we invest it, what's our return going to be? How much money do we need next year if we want to expand? How much is it going to cost to do our budget next year? So a financial manager will take care of all of that. The finance department looks at the funds, how we're going to raise them, how we're going to get new investment, what are the long-term costs of borrowing money. We'll talk about interest and finance a little bit later, but those are the things that you have to realize. If you're going to buy a car as an individual, you have to figure out how much the interest is going to be. What's the actual cost going to be? Not just the price that you're paying at the point of service or the point of purchase, but the overall cost before you actually pay that thing off. Finance is involved all of that. So if we're going to be buying equipment and we're borrowing money to do it, how are we going to get the money to pay that off? What's the value going to be to the organization in the long term? There's an economic principle called opportunity costs. Everything is finite. Money is finite. There's a limit to it. Time is finite. There's a limit to it. If you spend your time doing one thing, opportunity cost holds that you can't use it for something else. If you use money for one thing and it's a finite amount of money, you can't use that money to do something else. So you need to determine what it is that you want to use your time and your money for, because you're going to have to avoid doing something else or give up the opportunity to do something else. So you have to pick the things that are going to give you the best value after you conduct a cost-benefit analysis. That's all part of the financial function. R&D I've already talked about a little bit, but typically you have a chief technology officer. They deal with the research that's going on, and then they try to convert whatever that research is into something that marketing can actually turn into a product to be able to monetize it. The next slide is just an example of what an organizational chart looks like. This is what management typically does. They create the organization and they try to arrange it in the way that makes the most amount of sense. In this example, you've got a CEO or the chief executive officer. If it's a corporation, we'll talk about that a little bit later. It could be the president of a company, again, depending on the nature of the company. This president has four supervisors or executives reporting to them. You've got the COO or the Chief Operating Officer, the CFO or the Chief Financial Officer. CRO stands for Chief Revenue Officer. Essentially, it is the head of that department. It's a fairly new title to be used in organizations, and it typically includes sales and marketing. R&D also involves the Chief Technical Officer. And then under each office, you've got the operations division. They've got production, supply chain, getting the resources available to them, procurement, which is contracting for services and goods that are required. Under the finance bucket, you've got accounting, human resources, and legal. Under the marketing and sales bucket, you've got marketing, sales, and customer service. And then you've got development and IT under R&D. This is just an example. You may find that if you have a company, it would be more efficient to redesign this. You could do it by product, you could do it by organization, you could do it by location, you could break it into functions, just like this particular chart looks like. However you do it, it really should be mapped out according to the way that you decided is the most efficient and effective way to achieve your mission. Stakeholders are anybody that could be impacted or affected by the company. It's an individual or group that has an interest in the company. It could be the employees, the managers, the owners of the company. Obviously, the owners have an interest. They want to be able to make money. Those are the internal stakeholders. You also have external stakeholders, the suppliers who are giving you materials, society in general, your neighbors if you have a manufacturing plant, the government who collects taxes, the creditors, the people who you borrow money from and have to pay it back, the shareholders who own stock in a corporation. They expect to be paid back on their investment, known as dividends when we get to the corporation section. And then the customers who are wishing to make an exchange. They're going to give you money. They're going to give you something of value in return for something of value that they need. And they want to make sure that those products are good, that they work, that they provide value. So all of these people have an interest in the company, and they should be addressed in some way, shape, or form in order to make sure that they're satisfied, because if any of these are unhappy, it could be problematic for the company. It's important to understand the economic environment as well if you're going to be operating a business, and this slide here has a few key terms that you need to understand first. A recession is when you have 2 or more consecutive quarters of negative economic growth. The government measures growth in what is known as gross domestic product. Also, similar to that is gross national product. What they do is they add up all of the business functions, all of the things that all of the businesses produce in the country, and add it all up. And if it is more than it was the last quarter, dividing a year into quarters is 3 months. If this quarter is more than last quarter, we are in a period of economic growth. If this quarter is less in terms of GDP than last quarter, our gross domestic product is lower than it was the previous quarter, then we are contracting. Our economy is getting smaller. If that happens for 2 quarters in a row, 6 months, then that is what is known as a recession. If you have a long, extended period of economic contraction, which is also marked by decreased production, a lowering of demand, and a rise in unemployment, that is known as a depression. There's really only been one depression, and that was during the 1930s, and they called it the Great Depression. It was about 10 years of really terrible economic news. In 2007, 8, 9, 10, there was a really terrible recession. They called that the Great Recession. I guess it could have been called a depression, but nobody wanted to use the D word, so we just called it a recession. The pandemic resulted in the most recent economic contraction, so we did have a recession, but we are now technically in a period of economic growth. So the economic environment leads to the competitive environment. Something about the competition of businesses is really closely tied to prices. So let's take a look at a couple of things. Why is it when you buy something in bulk, why is it cheaper? If you go to BJ's and you buy 50 rolls of toilet paper, it's cheaper than if you buy 4. We all know that intuitively, but why is it true? There's a few reasons for that. Typically from the manufacturer's side, if you have to package 50 of something and you only have to sell one item and it's 50 instead of 4 items multiple times to achieve it, it's going to be less expensive for you to sell things in bulk. So it's cheaper for the manufacturer, it's even cheaper for the retailer. Therefore, it's easier and it's cheaper. Therefore, they can pass those cost savings on to the consumers in the form of lower prices. The other side of it is if you lower prices, you are giving people an incentive to buy more of a product. And if people buy more, that can actually increase your profit, even if you're reducing your profit margin. So let me give you an example. A company is selling a widget, just a fake product, at $10 each. The cost of those widgets is $6. That means the profit margin is $4. If I lower the price to say $8, then my profit margin is only $2. However, if lowering the price encourages people to buy more of that product, then I can make a bigger profit, even if I make less money for each item sold. So for example, if I have it at $10, I can sell one and I'll make a $4 profit. $10 less the $6 cost, I get $4 in profit. If I lower it to $8, the profit margin is only $2 per sale, but if I sell 4 of them as a result, then I make $8 in profit instead of just 4. Oftentimes when you go to the supermarket, you'll see 3 for the price of 2. You can buy 3 for $1.50, whatever it is. That's the whole premise here. They want to move more of this product, even if they make less of a profit per item sold, because by selling more of these items at a cheaper price, you can actually make more profit. It doesn't matter if I have a $4 profit margin if I only sell one. I just made $4. If I sell 4 at a $2 profit, I make 8. It's cheaper to sell in bulk. Those price benefits or those cost benefits can be passed along in the price, but there's also an incentive potentially to have increased sales by lowering prices. Both of those things can result in prices being cheaper if you buy in bulk. Very closely related to buying in bulk and the idea of lowering prices by decreasing costs is the idea of competitive advantage and how it has an effect on cost and price. The first thing to understand is something called economy of scale. Scale is a term relating to size. If you're bigger, not always, but typically if you're bigger, you may have an advantage over a smaller company. If I am a local hardware store, I am probably going to have a hard time competing with Home Depot or Lowe's. Massive companies that have a global footprint with billions of dollars of investment, when they negotiate with wholesalers and manufacturers to buy products, they can buy huge amounts and they can demand lower prices. If I'm on my own and I'm buying from a manufacturer or wholesaler, I'm not going to be buying in a huge amount. And like we just talked about, if I don't buy a lot, there's no incentive for them to lower the cost. Home Depot can buy a lot more hammers and they can get a better price at it, so they can sell those hammers cheaper than I can because I'm going to be paying more for them. Home Depot has an economy of scale. They're bigger and they can take advantage of that. That leads to a competitive advantage. This is an advantage in cost, quality, or both that one company has over another business. One example of a competitive advantage that I use is imagine a basketball team. You've got the best players in the world on your basketball team, but they're all 5 feet 6 inches tall. And the idea is, the basketball hoop is 10 feet in the air. If I have a team of 6'8" or 6'10" players, they don't have to be the best in the world. They just have to be okay. But they're probably going to win because they don't have to be the best. What they have to do is stick their hand up in the air and they can block a shot of someone who's smaller. If they happen to be really good players too, then I have an even bigger advantage. But if I have an operational process that's the equivalent of having taller players than the competition, I don't even have to be the best. I can still win. If I'm also the best and I have better operations and I have lower prices, then I have a huge competitive advantage and I am always going to come out on top. I'm going to make bigger profits. I'm probably going to be able to drive my competition out of business. So companies that have an economic advantage because of a competitive advantage due to their economy of scale, they can buy things in bulk, they can lower costs, they can have more competitive prices, they can make bigger profits. The competitive environment as of late is even more intense. The way the internet works and the way trade is working, you not only have to compete with Home Depot, you have to compete with hardware stores in France and manufacturers in Germany and China and all over the world. You don't necessarily just have local competition or regional competition or national competition. You have global competition. And all of these larger companies are trying to get a competitive advantage on a global scale, which can put a lot of pressure on companies to be as efficient and effective as possible. It also can prove very challenging for smaller businesses. A lot of smaller businesses don't necessarily compete with the same areas that larger companies do. There is a local hardware store where I live. It's still in business. Most of the other ones went out of business. They are not competing with Home Depot for everything that Home Depot does. They cater to professionals. Painters go there because the painters know that they have good quality products, better quality than you can get at Home Depot. And the people who work there know what they're talking about, and they can work and get better prices for them. So professional painters still go to the local hardware store because they can get better services that Home Depot doesn't do. So you create a little niche or a little segment of the market. That's the way that you can compete with the bigger companies. Even though you may not have a competitive advantage, you do for this one thing that you do that they don't. That's a way that you can actually still be in business without necessarily having to compete on the things that you can't compete with. If I'm trying to sell hammers, I'm not going to be able to get a better price than Home Depot, so that probably won't work. But if I do other things that Home Depot doesn't, I may still be able to maintain my business. We'll talk about technology in a little bit, especially something called Moore's Law, about how technology continues to advance at a very high and accelerating rate. What that means is if you are in business, you have to look at your technology, the services that you have available, the equipment that you have, and you constantly have to upgrade it because technology is always improving. And if you're not staying up to date and your competition is, they will get a competitive advantage and they will bury you. You have to have an internet presence on almost anything that you're doing, even if you're a service provider, even if I'm a plumber. People find other companies and business providers through the internet. But I can also have my bills being paid, I can do my taxes, I can do my invoicing, all online. And that can actually increase your efficiency quite a bit. The social environment is also something to look at. Many companies have mission, vision, and value statements. A lot of people do not want to do business with companies that don't abide by the values that the consumers hold dear. Demographics is a way to describe different subsections of American population. The biggest demographic is women. Close second is men. You can also divide people up by age. People over 60, people under 10, tweens, 20s, Generation X, etc. You can also divide demographics into national origin. Recently, about 5 years ago, the US Census found that even though the United States is a majority white or European nation in terms of its heritage, babies being born as recently as 5 years ago, there is no majority population by race or national origin. What that means is in another 20 or 30 years, when the older white population dies out and all of the babies where there is no majority white population, we will cease to have a majority white nation. We will basically be a country of minorities. European whites will still be the largest segment, the largest demographic segment, but it will no longer be the 70 or 80 or 90% that it was in previous years. It'll be 48, 47, 45%. Other demographic groups are growing dramatically. The Latino Hispanic groups are growing, Asian populations are growing, African American populations are continuing to grow, all at a higher rate than the white population is continuing to grow. So, what does that mean for business? Different groups of people buy different products. Older people buy different products. We are becoming an older nation. If you watch the news, where a lot of older people watch it, and you look at the advertising, you will see advertisements for prescription drugs. You'll see advertisements for legal services for people who are getting older, medical services, nursing services, etc. If you watch cartoons on Saturday morning, you'll see advertisements for children. Every group has different purchasing powers and capabilities. So if you understand what the different demographics are, you can start to help your marketing department figure out what products and services we should be providing to different groups of people in order to get a competitive advantage. The last thing we're going to talk about is the global environment. I mentioned there's a lot more competition. Free trade is growing. Typically, the democratic nations of the world, the United States, Europe, the European Union, Great Britain, which is no longer in the European Union, Canada, Mexico, a lot of other countries we have a lot of trade with. We do a lot of trade with China. It is relatively restricted, though, to certain things. It is not as open as it is with other countries because we have some political and economic issues with China because they are not considered to be a democracy. Different regions of the world can have economic blocs. In the Western Hemisphere, Canada, the United States, and Mexico in 1994 entered something called NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. That was refiled and redesigned in 2020 as the United States, Mexico, and Canada Agreement. And it basically reduces or eliminates any trading barriers. A trade barrier is something like a tariff or a regulation that could restrict the type of products that you can sell in another country. A tariff is just a tax. So if Mexico was making television sets and they were cheaper than American television sets, the United States might be worried that people who make television sets in the United States could be losing their jobs. What they could do is put a tariff on Mexican television sets to make them more expensive. This happened when the Trump administration talked about putting tariffs on China. And they mentioned that China would be paying more to be able to sell their products here. That's not how tariffs work. A tariff is a tax imposed by the United States on imported products to make them more expensive so that domestically made products will be more competitive. NAFTA and its successor, USMCA, eliminates tariffs or at least greatly reduces tariffs, and it creates a uniform level of regulation in terms of what kind of requirements there are, what type of electrical systems, electronics work, what type of safety procedures are involved in food production and medical facilities. When you have lowered trade, you have much more economic activity between different countries, which can increase the economic capacity of all of the countries involved. If Canada makes a product that we don't, and we make a product that Canada doesn't, we can trade those products and have access to them that we ordinarily wouldn't get, and that expands our economy and makes our GDP increase. The downside is if we are making a product and there's another country that can make it better and cheaper and they flood our market, the people who make that product in our country could end up losing their jobs. And then you end up with trade wars where you put a barrier, a quota. We'll talk about this a little bit more later on when we do international trade. But there could be tariffs, there could be quotas, there could be limitations on the amounts that people can buy in order to protect the domestic workforce and products. That's going to be it for Chapter 1.